Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to talk about doing some math based on a population study to answer a question from one of my favorite books, and that is the Exodus. And the question is very simply, how many people left Egypt during the Exodus? So, how do we solve this problem with math, and how do we solve it using a blank spreadsheet? Well, very simply, we have some things that we're given. We're given the number of years in Egypt, and that is 400 years in Egypt. And we know a couple things about population dynamics. We know that the length of time that it takes for a generation of people to be born, grow up, and have kids is about 25 years. So 25 years. And you can see this in today's population when we talk about Generation X and Y and Z and the baby boomers. Those generations, the points where you are in one generation versus another, are about 25 years apart. And that seems to be a dynamic of human populations. You only have one generation every 25 years. So we'll leave that as an assumption. And now we know the number of generations that have passed through between the time of Joseph and the time of the Exodus, just by taking 400 divided by 25, we get 16 generations. Okay, so now we're just going to make a table and track how many people are alive through time, we think, using a simple population model. We're not doing any kind of continuous growth because people don't grow continuously. People reproduce in discrete intervals. So we're going to have a column for generation, starting at generation 1 plus 1. I'm just going to drag this down to 16 generations. Okay. So how many people do we have to start each generation? Total people. Well, at the start of generation 1, we have Joseph and his brothers, who are the 12 tribes of Israel. And they are 12 brothers, of course, and they each have 12 wives. Let's assume they each have 12 wives. I don't feel like trying to calculate the average number of wives per male. Let's just say they have a one-to-one correspondence between men and women here. So that's good. So total people. Now we can calculate the number of new kids that are born in this generation. This generation here, generation 1, represents people that are between 0 and 25 years old. Their first 25 years. So let's put in a new assumption, and this is the key assumption. Kids per couple. Let's say that they have 2.1 kids per couple. That means every couple is going to have 2.1, let's say, net kids over the course of their lifetime. When I say net kids, I mean that how many kids do you have in your life that grow up and get old enough to reproduce? We're talking about the ancient world here, a time of high infant mortality, a time of high childhood mortality. It's tough to get a kid old enough where he or she can reproduce. So the mortality is pretty high here. So when I say net kids, I mean kids that have actually grown up and reproduced. But if we just take this assumption and use it, we're going to say the total people in the beginning, 24, times the kids per couple, divided by 2, because we have couples here. 24 people, each person is not producing 2 kids. We have couples producing kids. That's how human reproduction works. And now as far as deaths go, well, let's assume no one dies until they're 50. So at age 50, everyone dies. That's their oldest age you can get. Again, this is a high mortality period, so that's probably about right. So there's no deaths in the first generation because it's only 25 years long. But by the end of generation 2, all the people that started generation 1 are dead. So here's where we start having deaths in generations 2 through 16. That leaves us with an end of period population of 24 plus their kids minus the deaths. So 49 people. And that's how many people we have to start the next generation. Now, the new kids in generation 2, they're going to be, I'm going to assume that they're born from the new kids in generation 1. I'm going to just assume that the adults in generation 1 are not going to produce 2.1 kids this generation and 2.1 kids the next generation. I'm going to assume that this assumption here is net per lifetime. Okay, I'm just kind of redefining or defining this assumption more closely. This is more realistic. Instead of producing 2 kids every 25 years, most people nowadays, after they get to a certain age, they don't want to reset the clock and start producing kids again after 20, 25 years. And it was the same back then. So all the new kids are going to come from the previous generation's new kids. 2.1, again divided by 2 because we're assuming some couples. And that gives us 26 new kids, 49 people at the beginning of the period. The people that started the first generation, they're dead by the end of the second. So you have an end of period population of 52. Pretty flat. So if we just drag this down, grab this, highlight it, Control D, and that'll fill down the formula. And you'll see that 2.1 kids per lifetime net is just enough to kind of sustain the population over time. It's not it's not a very really good assumption. It's more of a break-even assumption. Even today, genealogists and archaeologists and people that study populations, they will put in 2.1 as just about the break-even point for a population to survive. And here it just kind of barely survived. You put in a chart, you can see its growth up and down. Yeah, this model is making some pretty harsh assumptions, which are probably good for the ancient world, place and time, but maybe not realistic in today's world with good health care and better child care and things like that. Of course, people in the ancient world probably had more kids than 2.1. If we crank it up to 3, you'll see that now we're getting an exponential curve, and we're getting something like 20,000 people at the end of 16 generations. 3 seems like a more reasonable number for this time and place because people were having more kids. There wasn't as much to do other than have kids and do work and be a slave. So you probably spend a lot of time having kids, maybe even 4. Well, 4 is like going to produce 2 million people. That's a little crazy. The entire population of Egypt at the time of the Exodus was about 1 million people. So to have 2 million Hebrews running around, they would never be able to manage that sort of population. I like the number 3. Seems reasonable to me. That would give you 20,000 people that actually left Egypt at the time of the Exodus. Of course, the book tells us that there were 600,000 people that took part in this Exodus. So that would be a pretty high growth rate. We can solve for it. We can just select our end of people row in generation 16, go to data, what if analysis, goal seek, and let's set this value 600 to 600,000. And we want to solve for what value of growth rate gives us 600,000 total people at the end of 16 generations. And we get 3.2 net kids per lifetime. That's what they'd have to get, I guess, 60,000. I guess I mistyped that. If I were to do it right and put 600, 1,000 by changing this number, there you go. You get 3.7 roughly net kids per lifetime that you would need to have in order to have 600,000 people leave Egypt. Again, seems like a big number to me. I kind of like the kids per couple number of 3. That sounds pretty reasonable to me, and that would lead to 20,000 people leaving Egypt at the time of the Exodus in real life. But you can see how sensitive this number of people that leave Egypt is to the number of kids per couple per lifetime. So that's kind of how we would tackle some of these dynamics. And now we can have fun arguing how many kids per couple did they actually have back then, and what evidence do we have to support this or that or the other thing. And we can just fight about it all night and maybe take the Bible number of 600,000 at face value. I tend to think it was much less, on the order of 20,000 seems more reasonable to me. But let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.